Nobody warned you about this. And that is exactly why you keep losing. You have been told your entire life that love wins. That kindness builds loyalty. That if you treat people well enough long enough they will stand by you when it matters most. You believed it. You lived by it. And somewhere along the way the people you were most generous with became the people who hurt you most. The ones you trusted completely became the ones who left first. The ones you loved without condition became the ones who took advantage without hesitation. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And Machiavelli identified it 500 years ago in a single sentence that has disturbed powerful people ever since. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Most people read that and think he was giving permission for cruelty. They are wrong. What Machiavelli was doing was something far more uncomfortable than that. He was documenting a truth about human psychology that every idealist wishes were not true, but every realist has experienced firsthand. A 2021 study from Princeton University examined the neurological difference between how humans process fear-based compliance versus love-based compliance in social relationships. Their finding was precise. Fear-based compliance activates the amygdala and produces consistent, predictable behavior across contexts. Love-based compliance activates the reward system and produces behavior that is highly context-dependent, meaning it holds when things are good and dissolves under sufficient pressure or competing incentive. In plain terms, people who love you will stay until staying becomes costly. People who respect and fear your consequences will factor those consequences into their behavior regardless of the emotional temperature of the moment. Stay with me until the end, because the final answer to the fear versus love question is not what Machiavelli is usually quoted as saying. It is something far more sophisticated. And it is the answer that actually works in the real world. Subscribe right now. What we build here is the psychology framework that the most effective people alive use and never explain publicly. Drop this in the comments. I am done being naive about what actually keeps people accountable. Not loyalty. Not love. Not shared history. The thing that most people discover too late, after they have already been betrayed by each of those things one too many times. You have given people your trust, your time, your genuine investment in who they could become. You have shown up when it was inconvenient. You have forgiven things that probably should not have been forgiven. You have led with warmth and hoped that warmth would be reciprocated when it counted most. And then the moment arrived. The moment where their loyalty was actually tested. Where staying aligned with you cost them something real. And you found out what your investment had actually purchased. This is the specific pain point that Machiavelli was writing about. Not in the abstract, philosophical sense. In the operational, practical sense of someone who had watched it destroy every ruler he had ever served. Because every ruler he served led with love, with generosity, with the genuine belief that being good to people would make people good to them. And Machiavelli watched every single one of them learn the same lesson at the worst possible moment. Number 1, why love alone has always failed as a leadership strategy. In 1494, Piero de' Medici inherited the most powerful position in Florence from his father, Lorenzo the Magnificent. Lorenzo had ruled through a combination of genuine generosity, artistic patronage and cultural investment that made him one of the most beloved rulers in Italian history. Piero had all of Lorenzo's advantages: the wealth, the connections, the inherited loyalty of a population that had genuinely loved his father. He led with the same warmth Lorenzo had led with. He expected the same results. When the French army appeared at the gates of Florence 3 weeks after Piero took power, the population that had loved his father so deeply simply opened the gates and let them in. The loyalty that seemed so solid evaporated the moment maintaining it became genuinely costly. Machiavelli was 25 years old when this happened, and what he observed was the specific mechanism by which love-based authority fails. Not the absence of genuine affection, not ingratitude or treachery in the dramatic sense, simply the fact that under sufficient external pressure love without consequence architecture cannot hold. Here is what the modern research says about this. A 2019 study from the Journal of Organizational Behavior tracked leadership effectiveness across 42 organizations over 5 years. Leaders who relied primarily on effective loyalty, meaning their people stayed because they genuinely liked and cared for the leader, showed dramatically higher rates of defection during organizational difficulty compared to leaders who combined genuine relationship quality with clear and consistently enforced accountability standards. The combination worked. The affection alone did not. Real talk. Think about the people in your life who have never held a consequence with you, who have forgiven everything without condition, whose love for you has had no architecture of accountability around it. And ask yourself honestly whether you have ever taken that love for granted, whether you have ever behaved differently with them than you would have behaved if you knew a real consequence was possible. Most people answer yes to that question. Not because they are bad people, because human behavior responds to incentive structures, and love without consequence is an incentive structure that has no enforcement mechanism. Machiavelli once wrote that men have less scruple in offending one who makes himself loved than one who makes himself feared, because love is held by a chain of obligation, which, men being selfish, is broken whenever it serves their purpose. But fear is maintained by a dread of punishment which never fails. Drop this in the comments. Love without accountability is not kindness. It is a gap in your architecture. You just understood why love alone fails. Now, here is the part most people miss entirely when they read Machiavelli on this subject. Because fear used wrong is more destructive than love used wrong. Number 2, why fear alone destroys everything it tries to build. In 1503, Cesare Borgia was the most feared man in Italy. His military record was unmatched. His reputation for decisive, brutal consequence had made him the one figure that every other power in the region calculated around. Nobody moved against him directly. Nobody tested his authority openly. The fear was real and it was working exactly as intended. And then his father, Pope Alexander VI, died and Borgia fell ill simultaneously. And in the space of 3 weeks every alliance he had built through fear dissolved completely. Every territory he had consolidated through intimidation reconsidered its position. Every figure who had been suppressed by the threat of his power moved the moment that power appeared uncertain. Machiavelli documented this with characteristic precision. Borgia had built his entire position On fear without the complementary architecture of genuine respect and authentic relationship. Which meant when the fear mechanism was temporarily disrupted, there was nothing underneath it to hold anything in place. A 2020 study from the London School of Economics examined leadership failure patterns across 38 high-profile organizational collapses. In 31 of the 38 cases, meaning 82%, the collapse was preceded by a leadership style the researchers characterized as dominance without investment, authority maintained through consequence, and control without the parallel investment in genuine relationship quality that gives consequence architecture its legitimacy. Here is the specific mechanism by which fear alone fails. When people comply out of pure fear, they are not invested in the outcome. They do what they must do to avoid the consequence and nothing beyond that. They do not bring discretionary effort. They do not flag problems proactively. They do not innovate or adapt or find solutions that were not explicitly requested. They wait to be told what to do, and they do exactly that and no more. Organizations and relationships built purely on fear are like machines that work perfectly until they encounter a situation that requires more than mechanical compliance, which is precisely the situation that every complex organization and every genuine relationship eventually faces. Real talk. Think about the person in your life who you have stayed in relationship with purely out of some form of fear or obligation, rather than genuine investment. How present are you in that relationship actually? How much discretionary effort do you bring? How proactively do you work to make it function well versus simply fulfilling the minimum required? Fear produces minimum compliance. Love produces maximum investment. Neither alone produces the outcome that actually works. Machiavelli once wrote that a prince ought to inspire fear in such a way that if he does not win love, he at any rate avoids hatred. Because hatred is the thing that makes fear an instrument of your eventual destruction, rather than your protection. Drop this in the comments. Fear without respect builds resentment. And resentment always finds its moment. You know why love alone fails. You know why fear alone destroys. Now here is the answer. That Machiavelli actually arrived at that. Almost nobody who quotes him ever explains. Number 3, the combination that actually works. In the Discourses, Machiavelli wrote something that almost no one who quotes the prince has read. He wrote that the founders of lasting republics and the leaders of enduring organizations achieved their permanence not through fear alone and not through love alone, but through something he called virtue combined with leg, virtue combined with law, character combined with structure, genuine investment in people combined with consistent and predictable consequence for violation. This is the answer that the modern research confirms with remarkable consistency. A 2022 meta-analysis from Harvard Business School examined leadership effectiveness data from over 200 studies conducted across 40 years. Their conclusion was precise. The most consistently effective leaders across every domain and every culture shared one specific combination: high warmth combined with high competence and high consistency in accountability. Not warmth alone. Not authority alone. The specific combination of genuine investment in people and genuine commitment to enforcing standards with predictable consistency. The warmth without accountability produced the failure pattern Machiavelli observed in Lorenzo's Son. The accountability without warmth produced the failure pattern he observed in Borgia. The combination produced the only pattern that actually held under pressure. Here is what this looks like in practice. Think about the authority figures in your life who you have both genuinely respected and genuinely wanted to do well for. Not feared into compliance. Not charmed into compliance. Genuinely invested in not letting down. Almost universally those figures had two qualities simultaneously. They made you feel seen and valued as a person. And they made it absolutely clear that certain standards were non-negotiable and that violations had real and consistent consequences. The warmth made you want to meet the standard. The consequence made you do it even on the days when you did not want to. A case study. Marcus led a team of 12 through one of the most difficult periods his organization had ever faced. His team produced results that no other team in the organization matched during that period. Not because he was the most beloved manager. Not because he was the most feared. Because his people knew two things with absolute certainty. He genuinely cared about their development, their well-being and their success. And he would not accept anything below the standard he had set and had enforced without exception since the day each of them joined the team. The warmth gave the accountability its legitimacy. The accountability gave the warmth its respect. Together they produced something that neither could have produced alone. Machiavelli once wrote that there is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. The new order Machiavelli was describing was not cruelty or love. It was the disciplined combination of both applied with wisdom and consistency. Drop this in the comments. I lead with warmth, and I enforce with consistency. That combination is unbeatable. You have the framework now. But here is the final piece that determines whether any of this actually works in your specific relationships and your specific context. Number 4. How to apply fear and love strategically without losing either. Here is the question that most people ask after understanding the fear and love framework. Okay, but how do I actually do this without becoming manipulative? Without becoming cold? Without losing the genuine warmth that makes me who I am? The answer requires understanding a distinction that Machiavelli made but most people reading him miss. The distinction between fear of you as a person and fear of consequences as a system. Personal fear meaning people are afraid of your emotional reactions, your unpredictability. Your potential for cruelty is destabilizing and produces exactly the destructive pattern Borgia demonstrated. It keeps people in constant anxiety. It prevents them from bringing their full engagement. It builds resentment that accumulates toward eventual explosion. Consequence fear meaning people understand with clarity and certainty that specific behaviors will produce specific outcomes is entirely different. It is stabilizing, not destabilizing. It is predictable, not anxiety producing. It does not require you to be cruel or cold or emotionally threatening. It requires you to be consistent. A 2021 study from Stanford Graduate School of Business found that the specific variable that determined whether accountability produced Fear of person or fear of consequence was behavioral consistency. Leaders who applied consequences inconsistently produced personal fear and anxiety. Leaders who applied consequences consistently and predictably produced clarity and respect. The specific application looks like this. You communicate the standard clearly in advance. You apply the consequence every single time the standard is violated, regardless of your emotional state that day, regardless of how much you like the person, regardless of how inconvenient the moment is. You never apply the consequence in anger or as an expression of personal displeasure. You apply it as the natural and predictable result of a standard that was understood by everyone involved. And simultaneously you invest genuinely in the people in your life. You show up for them. You see them as people, not as instruments. You celebrate what they do well with the same energy you use to address what they do wrong. You make it absolutely clear through your behavior, not just your words, that their success genuinely matters to you. A final case study. Elena had spent years leading her team with warmth and getting burned by it repeatedly. People who she had invested in most deeply were the ones who had taken advantage most extensively. She tried switching to a more distant, authoritative approach and lost the genuine engagement that had been her team's greatest strength. The thing that finally worked for her was the simplest and hardest thing simultaneously. She wrote down her 3 non-negotiable standards. She communicated them clearly to her team. She applied the consequence every single time one was violated, without exception and without apology. And she continued investing genuinely in every person on her team as a human being. Within 6 months she had the highest performing and most genuinely engaged team she had ever led. Not because she had become harder. Not because she had become softer. Because she had finally combined both with the consistency that gave each of them their actual power. Machiavelli once wrote that it is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles. The title of leader, of parent, of partner, of friend only carries weight when the person holding it combines genuine investment with genuine standards. Without both, the title is just a word. Drop this in the comments. I set the standard. I enforce it every time. And I care deeply about the people I hold to it. Now you have the complete answer to the question Machiavelli asked 500 years ago. Fear or love? Which one actually wins? Neither alone. Always both. The love that makes people want to meet your standard. The consequence that ensures they do even when they do not want to. The consistency that gives both their power and the genuine character that gives the whole thing its legitimacy. This is not about becoming someone different from who you are. It is about building the architecture around who you are that allows your genuine warmth to function as the powerful force it was always meant to be, rather than the vulnerability it has been allowed to become. Because the most dangerous person in any room is not the cruelest one or the most beloved one. It is the one who has mastered both, whose warmth is real and whose consequences are certain, whose care for you is genuine, and whose standards are absolute, who loves you and holds you accountable with equal commitment and equal consistency. That combination, Machiavelli called it the foundation of everything that lasts. And he was right. 500 years later, the research confirms it. The most effective Parents the most effective leaders the most. Effective partners are not the ones who chose fear or love. They are the ones who chose both and had the discipline and the consistency to maintain both under pressure. The question I want you to answer in the comments today: which of the two do you currently lean too far toward? Too much warmth without accountability, or too much accountability without genuine warmth? Name it, and let naming it be the beginning of building the combination that actually works.